घर में क्या करेंगे? वेरी नाइस यार।
Namaskar. Good evening to all. It is 6:30 and I thought it was time to welcome everyone. My name is Padmini Shankaran and I'm your host for this evening of the ETST webinar series. A warm welcome to all of you for this evening. As you know, we are delighted to have this series on a particular day, which is Gandhi Jayanti. And you are aware also that today our speaker is Professor Rajmohan Gandhi. And we're very fortunate to have him for this session. So as we always do, we'd like to begin this session as well with a slide deck on the ETST webinar series. Some of you who have attended previous sessions would be familiar with this slide deck. I urge all of you to look at it as it is, as Nitesh takes us through it, to understand what Education Today, Society Tomorrow, this group of passionate educators do, and to understand the commitment of this team, people who firmly believe in the power of education, who believe that the world can be changed for better through our classrooms. And as you go through it, you will come to understand the 5 components that are seen as major features of the Initiatives of Change network of schools. So these are the components that are focused upon during the ETST webinar series. We have looked at self-awareness, at ethical governance, and today we were thinking of looking at compassionate leadership which we will. But we are extremely fortunate to have with us Professor Rajmohan Gandhi, whose wide experience, not just in history, but also in fields related, would allow us to understand better the other components as well. So today, the focus will not be just on compassionate leadership, but also on the other aspects that we have considered important in the IFC schools. So there will be reference to diversity, to inclusion, and to self-awareness, to ethical governance, as well as to service to the community. So please keep this in mind because of this rare opportunity that we have today, that we are able to throw light on more than just compassionate leadership. And our session would include questions and responses to the other aspects, the other 4 components of the IFC network of schools as well, right? Thank you, Nitesh, for taking us through that slide deck. I'll take a minute to give you an overview of the flow of the session. Today, we will begin with a piece by Professor Rajmohan. He has chosen a topic on the occasion of Gandhi Jayanti to talk about Mahatma Gandhi, inspiration and provocation. This is going to be interesting and we all look forward to this. After this piece, we will have a conversation around questions that we at ETST are very interested in related to education, and the professor will share his insights on these questions. We then have a favorite hymn of Gandhiji being sung, a rendering of this as part of today's session, and it will be followed by the last part, which is about a part that would interest you, which is about responses to your questions related to education in India today. So this is the overview of the session. And I would like to begin by introducing the eminent personality for the day. We are very fortunate to have Professor Rajmohan Gandhi with us. So on behalf of my fellow professionals and members of the core ETST team, it is an honor to welcome Professor Rajmohan Gandhi to share his thoughts on the impact of Mahatma Gandhi's vision of education in India today. He is an eminent personality in his own right, but he plays a special role today as the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi on this occasion of Gandhi Jayanti. So I would like to take you through a brief bio of Professor Rajmohan Gandhi, a historian, a journalist, a biographer, interested in humanity's ability to live together in mutual respect, freedom, and peace. His last publication in December 2018 was Modern South India, a history from the 17th century to our times. Rajmohan Gandhi divides his time between India and the United States, where he currently serves as a research professor in the College of Education at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Professor Rajmohan has been teaching at this university since 1997. In 2007, he received the Indian History Congress's Biennial Award for his biography, Mohandas, the Man, His People, and the Empire. In December 2017, Rajmohan served as President, Contemporary History at the 78th session of the Indian History Congress, which was held in Kolkata, here in India. He's the author of several books. Included amongst them are Our Founding Fathers, Punjab, A History from Aurangzeb to Mountbatten, A Tale of Two Revolts, India 1857 and the American Civil War, Ghaffar Khan, Non-Violent Badshah of the Pakhtuns, Revenge and Reconciliation, Understanding South Asian History, Rajaji, a life, Patel, a life, and one last one, Understanding the Muslim Mind. These are some of the books he has authored. Rajmohan previously served as member of the Rajya Sabha. He was also a resident editor of the Indian Express in Chennai and was chief editor of Himmat, a magazine that was based out of Mumbai. He has been associated with initiatives of change right from 1956 and with the Asia Plateau from its inception in the 1960s. There is so much to be said about this gentleman with so many achievements to his credit, but that would take up everybody's time. So we will stop at this point. And with respect to his time and ours, we will go into the next part, which is the piece by Professor Rajmohan Gandhi himself on a topic of his choice, Mahatma Gandhi, Inspiration and Provocation. Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these very thoughtful words, which I greatly appreciate. And I appreciate being with everyone. I respect what you've been doing over the years. I'm aware somewhat of what you've been doing. And it's a pleasure to be with you on this special day. And also, I want to express my appreciation for the steady role that many of you have played for years, for decades in so many cases. It's wonderful to be with all of you. Now, at least 3 of my books have been or are about Gandhi. He features also in many other books that I've written, as he was a factor in the events and the people that are covered in those books. Let me have us say that anyone could have written my Gandhi books, where family memories have played only a small part, perhaps a negligible part. Anyone willing to study the Gandhi literature, including the collected works, could have written about Gandhi's life and thought. But we Indians don't need to read or study Gandhi. He is all around us. He enters us by osmosis, which means, among other things, that American school children who learn about Gandhi may know more about him than many Indian children do. Does Gandhi inspire and provoke us? That's my question. On October 2, 1946, Gandhi became 77, which in 1946 was a pretty advanced age. His dream of Swaraj or Azadi was about to be realized, but hates and fears were polarizing the Indian people. A chain of killings had begun. Kolkata, August 46. East Bengal, September, October 46. On October 28, 1946, Gandhi began a journey for healing. It took him first from Delhi to Kolkata, and thereafter to the rural taluka of Noakhali, now in Bangladesh. Noakhali is next to the Bangladeshi city of Comilla and very close to the Indian state of Tripura. Hundreds of Hindus had just been killed in Muslim-majority Noakhali when Gandhi arrived there. Rapes and forced conversions had occurred. From January 2, 1947, Gandhi, with a handful of companions, began a peace walk from his Noakhali base camp. During the next 60 days, he and his small team would halt overnight in 47 different villages, all of them predominantly Muslim villages. Their hosts, people with whom they stayed overnight, included dhobis, mochis, fishermen, julahas, weavers. On January 27, 1947, in a village called Palla, this is what Gandhi said at his prayer meeting. I'm really happy that I'm staying with a Harijan weaver. He looks after me with such love and care. A place without love is a prison, and a hut where love abides is more than a palace, unquote. Now, there was an anthropologist who accompanied Gandhi on this trek, a very well-known man called Nirmal Kumar Bose. He was also translating for Gandhi on this trek. he saw what Gandhi was doing, and he was part of Gandhi's activities also. He described what he called Gandhi's daily ministrations on behalf of love, unquote, and, quote, the extreme tenderness with which he regarded each individual, unquote, who related woes to Gandhi. Sikh children in the villages, Muslim children, Hindu children also commanded Gandhi's attention. Gandhi said that he wanted to wipe the tears away, but more than consolation, he hoped to transmit courage. Renouncing his chappals on this trek, Gandhi walked barefoot. When Manu, his grandniece who was assisting him, saw cuts on Gandhi's feet and protested, he replied, quote, "We don't go to our temples, mosques, or churches with shoes on. We tread here on holy ground where people have lost their loved ones. How can I wear chappals here?" In some villages, Hindus sang their welcome to Gandhi or walked with him to the next village, singing and beating drums. Their confidence began to return. Often the walk would commence with Vaishnava Jana or with Ekla Chalo Re. Gandhi sang himself. D.G. Tendulkar, a future biographer of Gandhi who had joined this trek, wrote, "The pitch of Gandhi's voice was low, but the tune was correct." Now, Tagore was the author of Ekla Chalo Re, as everyone knows, but Gandhi in Noakhali had become the song. Many years later, 53 years after this event, I visited Noakhali in the year 2000. And Muslim and Hindu residents whom I met spoke of Gandhi's visit in 1947 as if it had taken place the previous day. Now, as some of you know, after his Noakhali trek, he was in Bihar doing exactly the same thing. And in Bihar, the reverse had happened. Bihar was, of course, a Hindu majority place, and a great many Muslims had been killed, in fact, brutally killed, many thousands, many more than the victims killed in Noakhali. So I relate this incident because this is the inspiring Gandhi, the Gandhi who touches. But he was also, of course, provocative. Now, in the year 1915, when he was 45, he returned to India from South Africa, he was already something of a hero. News of his successful satyagrahas on behalf of South Africa's roughly treated Indian community had preceded Gandhi's return to India. And satyagraha itself was an exciting notion. Satyagraha seemed an alternative to two very unsatisfactory approaches that had been tried thus far for India's freedom. One was killing a few British officers. The other was presenting petitions in a humiliating way to the British. Yet this strange hero who was inspiring Indians without a sword or a gun in his hands was also an annoying hero, for he demanded change on two major fronts, insisting that India belonged equally to all who lived in India. He wanted Hindus and Muslims to come together. This to some was a provocation. Secondly, he insisted that Indian society's notions of high and low should be terminated. This also was provocative. Accordingly, his Ahmedabad ashram, which he started within weeks of his return to India in 1915, that's 105 years ago, this ashram not only included Muslims, it also admitted a young, untouchable couple, Dudabhai Dafda and his wife. Now, these two belonged to the community of Dheds, who worked with hides, animal skins. Having them in the ashram was the height of provocation. Some of those closest to Gandhi protested, including Kasturba. Evidently, this is what Gandhi told Kasturba. If you are unable to live with Dudabhai and his wife here in the ashram, you can leave me, and we should part as good friends. Now, Kasturba may not have been very progressive in some ways, but she was noble. She swallowed her point of view and stayed. But not Santokh, who was the wife of Gandhi's nephew and most gifted and capable associate, Magan Lal. Santokh had been a satyagrahi in South Africa alongside her husband, Magan Lal, and alongside Gandhi. But going against ancient practices in Ahmedabad was a different cup of tea. There was unrest in the ashram. Santokh fasted in opposition to the admission of Dudabhai and his wife. Gandhi fasted back. Santokh and Magan Lal packed their bags, said goodbye, and left the ashram. There was a disturbance also in the city of Ahmedabad and in the ashram's vicinity. Dudabhai and others in the ashram were roundly abused when they tried to take water from the neighborhood, from the neighborhood well. And money ceased to flow to the ashram. Gandhi was thinking of moving the ashram into a Dhed settlement, an untouchable settlement, in 1915, when a young industrialist in his 20s, Ambalal Sarabhai, quietly drove up with a sheaf of currency notes, handed 13,000 rupees to Gandhi, and went away. He and Gandhi had met only once before, in the Sarabhai home, to discuss prospects of an ashram in Ahmedabad. Sarabhai had been impressed by Gandhi's readiness to address caste inequalities, which young Sarabhai had always found offensive. Slowly, the tide turned. Dudabhai and his wife both showed forbearance. They found increasing acceptance from neighbors, visitors, and other ashramites. To Gandhi, the incident showed the efficacy of satyagraha in social questions. As for Santokh and Magan Lal, they returned, having, as Gandhi would later say, washed their hearts clean of untouchability. 2 years after this incident, Gandhi wrote a preface to a book of Gujarati poems by a poet called Amrit Lal Padhiyar. The poems depicted the cruel treatment daily meted out to Gujarat's untouchables. In this 1918 preface, written 102 years ago, this is what Gandhi said. He said, these poems should be read out to men and women in their millions publicly in public squares, in the same way that works like the Bhagavat are read out to them in every square. So Gandhi provocatively wanted public awareness of evils in our society. So I will stop here. These are my initial remarks.
Thank you, Professor. That was indeed insightful. It is one thing to read about Gandhiji in books and to look at videos and movies, but it is entirely a different thing to hear about it from his own family member, someone who is able to bring to life those interesting aspects of Gandhiji's life, which truly do inspire us and provoke us. Perhaps provocation is the beginning of thinking differently, of acquiring other perspectives. So thank you very much for sharing those two anecdotes from Mahatma Gandhi's life. We move on to the next part, which is a conversation wherein questions that have been put together by ETST members are placed before the professor. And these are questions related to our concerns about education in India today. And we would like to hear professor's responses to these questions. I will be putting these questions. And as I do so, I urge those who are in the audience and are interested in other questions and concerns, if you can add them to the chat box at this time. One of our members will be monitoring these questions as well. And later in the session, there will be an opportunity for these questions to be voiced as well. So we'll begin now with the conversation with Professor. We will start with the first question. Gandhiji conveyed that one of the major aims of education was to purify the hearts and minds of people and to create a society free from inequalities, from exploitation and aggression. Given the current education systems in India, what is the role of educators in reducing the visible and rampant inequalities present in society, in Indian society?
Now, before I try to answer this question, let me say that my expertise is really in the life of Gandhi and in some historical happenings in India, mostly in India, sometimes elsewhere too. Education in India, which is of course your expertise, is not something that I really know too much about. I respect, I admire all of you, but I want you to know that all of you or each of you knows far more about what should happen in schools than I do. So for you to seek my opinion or advice is very generous on your part. I don't know how wise it is on your part, but since you're asking me, I will give such thoughts as I have. But please bear in mind how schools should be run, how teachers should teach, is not my area of expertise at all. Okay, but how should education address inequalities present in Indian society?
Hi.
So,
हाँ यार टाइम ही नहीं मिलता
yeah, I think some
आ गए
mics
वापस
should be turned off. All mics should be turned off. Okay, so one question that I think a student should be invited to ask, I think in schools or anywhere, have any of us ever felt left out, ignored, unfairly treated by parents, uncles and aunts because of our gender or for any other reasons? So that is one way of understanding what the pinch, the hurt, wounds that unequal treatment leave. I think our school children should be informed of the facts about income levels, how some people live and how the majority of people live in India. People should have information about how the police treat different kinds of people, about the medical attention the different groups of people receive or do not receive. We should teach history also, quite frankly. We should acknowledge the fact that yes, there was untouchability in India all around us. There still may be, but there certainly were great levels of untouchability and wounding levels. And unseeability, people had to keep a distance so they should not even be seen. And people were kept out of temples for not years, tens of years, centuries. They were kept out of schools or they were kept at the back of the classroom. These facts of history should also be frankly taught. Now, I think all of you know about the wonderful films and documentaries that may be available that also can throw light on such matters. We can also teach by giving examples from other countries. The example of Nelson Mandela, incredible example, 27 years or so in prison, leads a great fight for rights of the Africans. And then coming out, he befriends those who had put him in prison. So that's an incredible story of addressing inequality and then finding reconciliation and living together. Now, Gandhi being thrown out of a train, that's a well-known story everybody knows, and how that enabled him to put up a fight thereafter. But then, are people thrown out sometimes of trains in India because we don't like them, because of prejudice, because of inequality, of dislike? That also should be discussed in school. So I would say that promoting a discussion, promoting an expression, sharing of inequalities either observed by students or even experienced by students. We promote a discussion, and then we promote a reflection on what people have experienced. So these are some stray ideas on how to address inequalities in India. That's it.
I had to unmute.
Yeah.
Thank you. Definitely there is a place for discussion, for understanding history in terms of different perspectives, not just those of the victor, and of being able to listen to other perspectives and other opinions, which is what discussion is supposed to help us to do. So yes, indeed. We move on to the next question. Gandhiji had spoken about the 7 sins and how we could balance them. How, in your opinion, how could we incorporate this into our education system? And ETST speaks a lot about ethical governance and the importance of ethical governance in our schools. So how would this reconcile with Gandhi's notion of the 7 sins?
So all of you are aware, but let me repeat those 7 social sins.
Yes.
Wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, religion without sacrifice. And here sacrifice doesn't mean sacrificing an animal, but sacrifice of a pleasure or enjoyment or position or money. Politics without principle. Now, it would, of course, be absolutely wonderful if students and teachers can reflect on these. But I think it's also useful and I think necessary if we are talking about these 7 social sins to inform students that this was not an original Gandhi thought. It is true that Gandhi publicized these as far back as in October 1925 in his journal, Young India. He published these 7 social sins with this heading, 7 social sins. But it was actually a friend in England who had sent Gandhi this list of 7 sins. And these 7 sins had been spoken about by a man called Frederick Lewis Donaldson, who was an English preacher. So this is not a major point, but I think it's perhaps a necessary point that if we know about something interesting or exciting, and if we know about the original source, that also should be communicated to students. Mm-hmm. Now, beauty about these 7 social sins is their universality. Mm-hmm. They apply to every society, every part of India, every part of the world, every country. No one can say that these are Indian sins or British sins or Pakistani sins or Chinese sins. True. Whether they are Muslim sins, Christian sins, Hindu sins, Buddhist sins, Aryan sins, Dravidian sins, they are human weaknesses, weaknesses of human society. They apply to every part of the world, every part of our country, and they make sense to us, whatever our profession or interest or involvement.
Thank you. Thank you for that and for giving us that source. Because as you rightly pointed out, and as a professor in research, it comes from you quite automatically. Sources are important for us to understand. The fact that Gandhiji was able to recognize the relevance of these in our society as in any other society, I guess, speaks to his insight. We're going on to an area that interests all of us a lot, and this has to do with leadership and leadership in education, in schools. School leadership plays a central role in building the culture of a school, of any school. How could our school leaders practice compassionate leadership in a system that demands rigor, that demands integrity and inclusion? Trying to balance all of these, how can we continue to be compassionate leaders?
So first, thank you very much. A very interesting question. So just on compassion, I want to make, in a way, an obvious point. Let us remember, if you are again thinking of Gandhi, his life, that for most of his life, he was the commander of a rebel army, non-violent army, but it was a rebel army. He was training his army in discipline. He was training his army in unity. And therefore, as we have seen, he had to be harsh to Magan Lal, to Santok, even to his wife. And the other instances of his harshness and toughness to soldiers who were fighting to change things. Now, in at least one way, the only compassion he could show was to the enemy, to the British, to the adversary. He was never the ruler of a country who had to show compassion to subjects of a country. Yes, he wanted the people to be compassionate to one another, and especially to the weakest among them. I think many of you are perhaps aware of his well-known talisman. In August 47, when India becomes independent, that month he's in Kolkata, staying in a very humble area, trying to bring peace. And there somebody asked him, what is the answer to a dilemma? What is the answer to a doubt? If you don't know what to do, how should you decide? Then he gives this answer, which you are aware of, that think of the poorest, weakest person you've ever encountered and ask yourself if what you do will help that person or not help that person. Whether that will empower that person. Incidentally, it's worth noting in August 1947, Gandhi uses the phrase empowerment in relation to the weakest people in that famous answer. So that's an aspect of his compassion. Now, I'm trying to understand a little bit about applying this to school life. To repeat, it's not an area of my real knowledge or expertise. But I think we can ask, does compassionate mean lenient? Often it does. Refraining from implementing a punishment or a prescribed response or a stricture or a remark of disapproval can at times deeply stir the student concerned or the person concerned. The target of any contemplated disapproval, if compassion is shown, that of course can help. But it does not mean that you hesitate to take a clear, strict, tough decision. I think the essence of compassion is a passion or feeling for the other person. You want that person to be at their best. It also would mean placing the success of the team ahead of individual ambitions. Compassionate leadership may be thought of as a synonym for teamwork or for team building or for institution building. I had the chance in the year 1990, long time ago, when Nelson Mandela, just released from prison, this is before he assumed leadership of his country, was in India. And I was able to arrange an interview on television with several students of Nelson Mandela, which was shown, I think it must have been Doordarshan then. And students asked him questions. I also asked some questions. One question that was asked of Mandela was this. At that time, there was a famous man in the United States who had called Mandela the Moses of his people. So the question was asked to Mandela, so-and-so has called you as the Moses of your people. What does Nelson Mandela think about Nelson Mandela? His answer then was, I will tell you about Oliver Tambo. Now, Oliver Tambo was one of his colleagues in the African National Congress, a great figure. But Nelson Mandela chose that moment to talk not about himself, but about his colleague, Oliver Tambo. So this was his way of sharing that he wanted to build a team and to strengthen a team. So I think in your question, you use these three words: rigor, integrity, inclusion. I think this last word, inclusion, is a very important thing. It's something that we can so often forget. I often forget this in my dealings with people. But if we can remember that in every important situation, if it comes to a decision or what to do, what not to do, if we can think of who else can help us with that decision, it's not always feasible, but I think that also is a very important element of compassionate leadership.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It is indeed true that this topic has raised a fair number of opinions, and we have a WhatsApp group, and people have been talking in that and have had many concerns that they have shared. And one of the things we have recognized is in sharing these concerns, in recognizing each other's difficulties in handling leadership and the cases and scenarios that they handle. In discussing these, we learn from each other as well. So part of what ETST does is to provide an opportunity for all of us to be able to talk with each other about things and to learn from each other in the sharing process. So again, thank you for your perspective and for reminding us of the importance of working as a team and of being able to build that culture. I think it's also true to say that there is no point at which we can say we are done. It's an ongoing, progressive kind of a movement where we're all learning from each other and we're all trying to improve. We go to Gandhiji's concept of Nai Talim, and this that he was very close to. We were wondering how this would manifest in the present context of education in India.
So that's a very important question. And I want everyone here to focus on these two words, Nai Talim. Talim, of course, means education. Nai means new. And I think if we are discussing Nai Talim, we should also discuss it in our times. We should be willing to be new about Nai Talim also. Now, in my understanding, some of the features of Gandhi's Nai Talim, which I think are very relevant today, are as follows. That the teacher learns also with the student, from the student. Everyone learns from one another. So mutuality is a core element, as I understand it, of Nai Talim. The student learns the value of creating something with the human hand, heart, brain, creating something from what is available around us or maybe easily produced in our area. So everyone becomes a creator. So creating things or creativity, creation or co-creation is a very important part, of course, of Nai Talim and this notion of the spinning wheel and charkha, which you know about. But I would say that spinning the charkha is not the only way to create. There may be other ways of creating things and using our labor, our mind, heart to create things. That if that becomes a part of education, I think it can only help. But just to return to the charkha for a minute, apart from enabling the poorest person, the weakest person to create something, to be productive, to contribute, which was a very important feature. The charkha was also a great bond between people. Somebody was spinning, somebody was then buying and wearing the khadi. So between the poor and the well-off, between the village and the town, also there was a bond. And those who wore khadi all across India, the texture, the feel of it, the sight of it, the roughness of it, gave a sense that you were doing something difficult, necessary, but something also beautiful. It also was a uniting bond. Which to me is a reminder that education should be bonding us together. We may not only focus on the charkha, but let us think of things that bond us with one another, with our neighbors, distant neighbors, near neighbors. So to me, bonding with neighbors, with our country persons, with humanity is also perhaps an important, in my interpretation, Nai Talim. I think everybody should feel free to interpret Nai Talim in their best possible way. And if we feel that bonding with humanity is also a good thing, as I do, then I think that the world should also always feature in our schools. The cultures of the world, the languages of the world, and where possible, to the extent possible, in ways possible, some flavor of the sounds of different languages would be also wonderful in our schools. Now, as I mentioned in reference to Gandhi's famous talisman, what to do if you are in doubt, if you're in a dilemma. And he used the phrase empowerment. I think that empowering one another, empowering the weak should be absolutely at the heart of any Naati Talim. And of course, Gandhi was always talking about clean air, clean water, and the environment. And teaching everyone the value of clean air and environment. So I think the environment is also, in my understanding or my redesign of Naati Talim, would have a central place.
Thank you. It reminds us of the fact that we have in our midst this year the version of the new education policy 2020, and that too can be seen as Naati Talim. And we hope that there can be some connect between what Gandhiji talked about and what is happening today. We are all trying to understand this new policy and to put it forward. ETST is a part of trying to implement the policy, which is, I think, our biggest challenge ahead of us. And we hope that we can learn from this, learn from the past when we move into the future. There is one last question which concerns all of us again, and it goes back to the notion of ethics. It is about all of us recognizing that education in many cases has become very commercialized, and it has become this chasing after high marks and getting the highest mark in order to go on to the next step of education, to the exclusion of almost all else. In this, and this is something that we all have to deal with. So under these circumstances, where do we stand in terms of ethics? What is our role as educators in terms of ethics? If you could throw some light on that.
Well, that's a very real question. And I know how many, every family with children, every student, every young person has these questions about the future, where they will fall, where they will stand, where they will rise, how they will survive, how they will flourish. And so getting the appropriate marks and getting admissions and all these are absolutely life and death questions. And yet I think perhaps those of us who are responsible in a school or any place where youngsters are involved, have to ask ourselves, what is the spirit that we are transmitting in our school, in our home, in our place of work? What are we conveying to the extent possible, a deeper meaning of success, deeper meaning of achievement? What makes a person a great individual, a success? Is greatness produced by the ballot box? Is it produced by conversations, WhatsApp, Twitter, or by some certificates or marks, by making it to some Fortune 500 list? I think if we can somehow recognize and share this recognition, foster this spirit, that every person in our school, student, teacher, is a person with very deep hungers and thirsts that are probably not recognized even by the person concerned. But there are longings in each of us much greater than a longing for wealth or power or pleasure or success. And a school that nurtures an environment for recognizing these deeper hungers, a school that knows, even if it doesn't always shout about it, a school that knows that the call of conscience, the call of the spirit, the call of the Almighty is greater than the call of power, money. I think subconsciously or whatever, that that spirit has to be fostered. And I think ethics and kindness and goodwill will probably also emerge as a result of all this. And these are very general, broad thoughts. But I think if we can have this longing in us in a school, that we want our students to learn in the core of their core, that something great is possible for them, that cheating or meanness or revenge is an inferior path. I think exactly how to do this, of course, all of you know much better than I do. But if that is our longing, our determination, I'm sure something like that will be imparted, transmitted, and accepted, I think.
Thank you again. Often in our discussions as part of the ETST group, we speak about the values that need to be a part of the culture of a school and ask ourselves, what are these values? What matters? I think Gandhiji also reminds us that education depends on the context in which it happens, whether it is a country or a region, and that it needs to match the context and the needs of the people in that context. And this is something I think that we all struggle with, understanding what are the needs. But we cannot get away from the fact that most of us have recognized the importance of values in imparting values and espousing values and being role models for these values, so that it is not just the learning of content, but of becoming better human beings that ultimately makes a difference. So thank you so much for reminding us about that. We've come to the end of our set of questions, Professor, and we'd like to thank you for the very succinct and clear and comprehensive responses. You say you are not very familiar with the educational systems, but you still come through with such clarity of thought and words that it makes a difference to us. So thank you very much for your responses. I'd like to take us to the next part, which is a rendering of the hymn Vaishnava Janato by our very own Dr. Sangeeta Srivastava, who has done a recording of it and will be sharing it with us. You will also see the lyrics of the song at the bottom. I hope you enjoy this one. Nitesh.
वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहे जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे। वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहे जे पीड़ पराई जाने
After that beautiful rendering of an evocative hymn, it seems very appropriate for us to have a minute's silence. As we do quiet time, as we do at ETST, we will have a minute's silence for reflection starting now. Thank you. This is a tradition that we like to observe at every ETST webinar session. We now like to take you to the next part of today's session, which is to address questions that have been put forth by participants. Dilnaz, who is one of the core members of the core team, one of the ETST members of the core team, will be identifying some of these questions and calling on participants who wrote the questions to actually voice them. Dilnaz, over to you at this point.
Right. Thank you so much, Padmini. Good evening to everyone, and I'm sure all of you are completely mesmerized by this talk that we've had since the past hour and a half. And there are a flurry of questions that have come up, not just on our Zoom platform, but even on YouTube, where this program is being live telecasted. So yes, we've got lots of questions, and this one came up first, and it came up from Ms. Kavita Anand. May I call upon Ms. Kavita Anand to ask her question, please?
Thank you so much, Dilnaz. Mr. Gandhi, I think we've all been aware that caste continues to play a very important role in today's world. And in this country, it's continuing to be the bane of the existence for a lot of people, considering the number of SC/ST groups there are in this country. It's actually quite interesting how we can look at it in, the country in a religious manner at all. So the real curiosity for me has always been that, why is it always positioned as Gandhiji and Ambedkarji being different in their approach to caste? What really was that difference? And did it really, could you throw some more light on that difference?
Well, this is a great question that calls for a 90-minute session by itself. But in short, my answer is that until 1947-48, when India became independent, Gandhi was very strongly focused on national independence. He was also focused on caste equalities. But with Dr. Ambedkar, social justice and removal of caste inequality was the #1 priority. So it was more a question of prioritization. So Gandhi was working on independence, he was working on Hindu-Muslim unity, he was working on Naati Taaleem, he was also working on, in his own way, caste inequality. It's also against caste inequality. It is true that he steadily radicalized his position. And I think in his radicalization, Dr. Ambedkar's stand is Dr. Ambedkar's scathing criticism of Gandhi also played a part. But I would also say that in Gandhi's case, in practice, he was a radical from the start. When I told you about the 1915 disturbance in the ashram over admission of the untouchable couple. So Gandhi was a radical in terms of practicing caste equality from the very beginning, but knowing how traditional Indian society was. And because he needed the support of the caste Hindus also in the battle for India's independence, he could not say you're all horrible people. He needed them. They were in influential positions, not only in his ashram, but in the country as a whole. And so he had to therefore sometimes go slow in his, you might say, attack on the caste system. So we have to look at Gandhi with all his different aims, sometimes conflicting aims. And it's also interesting to see how Gandhi sometimes emphasized the Hindu-Muslim question, sometimes emphasized the caste question, sometimes emphasized the political question. But the most amazing thing is how in 47, 48, 49, 50, because Gandhi died in 48, but then Dr. Ambedkar, after decades of fierce opposition to the Congress movement, then became such a leading member of the Constituent Assembly at the request of, at the invitation of not only Nehru and Patel, but strongly encouraged by Gandhi. So there was an amazing partnership in the creation of the Constitution between these two different streams. You might say there's the national independence stream and the social justice stream merged at the time. And with all their differences, I think we are entitled as scholars to see that Gandhi and Ambedkar were more partners than foes or adversaries.
Right, thank you, sir, for that. I now call upon Ms. Mohini Jagtap to ask her next question. Ms. Mohini Jagtap.
Good evening, sir. I would like to ask one thing. Our dear Bapuji fought for his whole life about the casteism. So, what do you feel that shouldn't we remove this caste and religion column from any of the form, like educational forms or anywhere? Because what happens that the people belonging to higher strata gets social benefits, and the people belonging to lower strata gets financial benefits. So don't you think that we should remove this column from any of the educational form? What is your idea about it?
So I don't know in which educational form caste or religion occurs, or whether it occurs everywhere. I don't know this. It must vary from place to place, but what you are saying points to a very important anomaly. We want to have equality. We also want to remove these distinctions. But because we have also to face the injustice that many groups have suffered from for decades, for a long time. So we have these quotas, reservations, in so many places. And if you have to have reservations, then you must have the ways of determining who is entitled to them, who is not. Therefore, some kind of column is needed somewhere. So in order to abolish one day caste altogether, we have to recognize caste and provide justice to those who have been very poorly treated. This is a very tough situation. But what you are feeling for is absolutely necessary. We must reach a stage where it becomes absolutely meaningless to speak about one's caste or whatever. So, but in order to get there, we must recognize the reality that so many people who are born in unfortunate situations because of their caste have suffered. Now, you have everybody, I'm sure all of India must be talking about these rapes and killings of these young women. So this persons were brutally killed, brutally assaulted, raped in the most cruel way imaginable. Why? Because they were supposed to be in that particular caste, and that those with guns and with land had the power over this human being to do anything they wanted, like some piece of furniture, twist and turn and break. So that is a reality in our country. So we want to reach that stage where we don't refer to these classifications, but in order to render justice, some kind of classification for some time, I'm afraid, is unavoidable.
Thank you, Professor. The next question comes from Ms. Sushmita R. Ms. Sushmita R, please ask your question.
I am Chitra, a teacher from a remote place in Tamil Nadu. First, namaskar. I am Tamilian. I cannot speak anything, a word in Hindi, but as a humble disciple of Gandhiji, I felt always, had he lived a few more years, he would have done some justice to this downtrodden people. What is your opinion, Professor? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, but I have one request to make. Now, in my, no human being is perfect. And Gandhi was also a human being. He did some amazing things, but he was not perfect. He could not change everything. I think we should grow out of a wish that some great person should solve all our problems. You say that Gandhi should have lived longer and solved this problem also. Did he not try enough? I mean, we should have some mercy on him also. When he was killed, the great poet Sarojini Naidu wrote a very powerful poem saying, "Father, do not rest in peace. We still need you. So do not rest in peace." That also is a good way of honoring somebody. But I think a better way of honoring somebody is to say, Gandhi, you go and rest. We will do the job.
Definitely.
We're going to do the job.
We will do the job. Yes, I'm also running a Gandhian club here. I'm a small.
Sure, you're doing. Thank you, Sushmita ji. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Right. We also have some questions coming from the YouTube telecast that we are having. And before we ask our next speaker to ask the question, I wanted to post a very common question that's come across from YouTube. And that is, Professor, what do you feel and understand about the Mahatma's mantras?
Mantras?
Yes, that's the question.
Well, I don't quite understand what is meant by this question, a mantra. So if by mantra is meant something that through incantation, through some kind of remarkable results are achieved, I don't know. I'm not sure that Gandhi ever felt that the sound of something or the recitation of something will automatically produce. What Gandhi was sure of was that if his concern was for the weakest person, that would be useful. Of course, now he had this line, Ishwar Allah Tere Naam. So that the Almighty is called by different names in different parts of the world. And that anybody who addresses the Almighty in whatever name does reach the Almighty. This was his belief. And this was something that he tried to share with, and millions of India also accepted it. One of Gandhi's great legacies, apart, this great poet Narsi Mehta wrote Vaishnava Janato hundreds of years ago. So Gandhi infused new power into it, and all of you know how the whole world, people in all languages are singing Vaishnava Janato. And that thought that a good person is he or she who does good to the pariah, to the stranger, to the other person, who understands the pain of the other person. So if these two thoughts, a good person is a person who understands the pain of the stranger, and that whatever name we give to the Almighty, our plea goes to the same all-loving, all-powerful force. If these two are regarded as mantras, as key thoughts, as very helpful thoughts that will help humanity, yes. But Gandhi never thought of something which through incantation or magic would change things around you.
Yes, another very common question coming up is today, two great men share their birthdays. Lal Bahadur Shastri as well. People want to know your views about him as well.
Yes, Lal Bahadur Shastri was a fantastic human being, absolutely amazing human being. Very shrewd, but very humble, very willing to serve. Also a strong believer in what Gandhi believed in terms of helping the farmer, but also in Hindu-Muslim unity. You know that Lal Bahadur Shastri was in Tashkent and he signed something with the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the head of Pakistan at the time, came back. So he had the same prayer, the same goal, that the people of this entire subcontinent should one day become friends. So in his, Lal Bahadur Shastri was a phenomenal human being. And I'm very glad that we are remembering him also today.
Thank you. May I now call upon Zunaira Minhaj to ask a question. Ms. Zunaira. If Zunaira is unable to communicate, I can put her question forward. It says, people take advantage of compassionate gestures sometimes. So how does one decide if a person actually needs your compassion or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. So whether it is willingness to show compassion, or sometimes a willingness to express the truth. So whenever we want to obey our conscience or some deep thing inside us that wants us to do something unusual or difficult but necessary, there's a great possibility that our step, whether it's a compassionate step or a truthful step or a courageous step, will not evoke the response that everybody wants or we want. Of course, this is the great beauty of it. If there was some kind of assurance of a good response, then goodness would no longer be goodness. It would be business practice. It would be so simple and therefore so unimpressive. So the very power, the very beauty, the very charm of a compassionate gesture or any other brave gesture is the uncertainty of the response. So we have to live with that. We have to hope. If we believe in the Almighty, we can pray for a good response. But I think even when there is a negative response, and we are, you might say, we're made use of, we become a doormat for somebody else. That's the feeling sometimes we get. I think that is where we need to have to recognize that the heroic path, the path of true greatness through history, has always been a difficult path, not a pleasant path. And there is humiliation in it, there is sorrow in it, there is danger in it, there's suffering in it, but there is also, in the end, very, very great satisfaction. And it's the right path. So if the right path were always pleasant, always effective, it would lose its charm.
Perfect, so well said. May I now call upon Ms. Meenal Mishra to ask a question. Is Meenal Mishra here?
Yeah, good evening. Namaste, Professor. I would like to take you to the down memory lane. A very, childish question I just want to ask. what qualities of your grandfather fascinated you as a child?
Sorry to interrupt. Yes, but Meena, that's a very common question that we've had even on our YouTube, sir. And maybe if you could share along with this some qualities that you think you have in common with Gandhiji as well.
Yes, I have one thing in common with him. I'm now an old man, which is what he was. I'm older now than what he was when he died. So that's about the only thing that I have in common. But let me make this point, which is not necessarily relevant only to schools or to teaching, but it's perhaps may be of interest. So during Gandhi's lifetime, he was loved and praised for many things. One was, see what an amazing man. There's no favoritism he shows to his children. In fact, he's showing no attachment to his children. He's a Bairagi, and he's putting the people of India ahead, and he's indifferent towards his family, and that was regarded as something wonderful and noble and heroic. But in more recent years, when it's become in some circles quite fashionable to criticize him, what a man. He didn't even take enough care of his children. He neglected his family. How terrible. So I want to speak a bit on Gandhi and his family life. It is true. Now, I was 12 and a half when he was killed. I was going to school in Delhi. My father was a journalist who was editor of the Hindustan Times in Delhi. And so that is where I and my siblings, we grew up. When I was going from 10 to 12, that is from 45 to 48, during that period, 10 to 12 and a half, during that period, Gandhi was going from 76 to 78. He was often in Delhi, which is where we were staying, my siblings and my parents. So I saw a lot of him in that period. He's from 76, 77, 78, I'm 10, 11, 12. I meet him very often. I never have one-to-one conversations with him because everybody is wanting to meet him, and he has decided that he wants to make all of India his family. And rightly or wrongly, family first was not his motto. All of India was his family. He wanted to make all of India his family. A very tough task, an impossible task, but he tried his utmost. And one result of that decision of his was that there were no one-on-one sessions with his grandchildren. But when my sister, my brothers and I met him, he was very affectionate. Sometimes he would, hug us, and sometimes he would pat us or thump us on the back as a mark of affection. We could all feel his love, but we knew that he wanted to reserve his heart and love also for, or keep most of his heart and love for everybody else. So everybody wanted to meet him, the poor people. In 46, 47, 48, already the division had started, ill will and killings and violence. So Hindus and Sikh refugees from Pakistan had come. They were complaining, "Hame kya hua? Aapne hum bachaya nahi." The Muslims of Delhi were being pushed out of Delhi. They would also try to meet him. "Hame bachao, hamare liye kuch karo." And I would hear some of this, people meeting him. And then there were these prayer meetings, which also where I would take part. Whenever he was with us, full of affection. But what struck me most, what has left a permanent impress on my life, was the way he dealt with those who were angry with him, those who were criticizing him, even hostile to him, sometimes threatening him. He was courteous to them. He was quite cordial to them, but he never gave up on his convictions. And it was clear that whatever they would do, they could kill him. And even though I was only 10, 11, 12, I could understand this. I could understand both the hostility he was sometimes facing and his absolute determination not to be shaken from his true convictions. This is what came across from him, apart from his love for us, which we felt. I'll take one more minute. I think because this may interest you. Some of you have heard of this remarkable woman, Aruna Asif Ali, who died in the 90s. She was a hero of the Quit India movement. She was an underground. She was related to Tagore. Then she married this Muslim, very successful lawyer, Asif Ali. Anyway, so this is shortly before she died. There was a gathering in Delhi. My brother Ramchandra, who is no longer with us, wonderful philosopher, great person, a year and a half younger than me, but wiser than me, far greater scholar. So there was a gathering at this 30th January marketplace in Delhi where Gandhiji was killed. We were about 70, 80, 90 people observing something. And Aruna Asif Ali was seated, and I was near her. And Ramu was speaking, my brother Ramchandra was speaking. And he spoke about his grandfather, our grandfather. And he became quite emotional. So Aruna Asif Ali then turned to me. We were both listening to Ramu and said to me, I didn't know that Ramu felt so deeply. So I was struck by that because of Gandhiji's detachment, he had become a kind of a Bairagi, but he did have this love for his family, and his children had their love for him. So in the midst of his wanting to make all of India his family, and all India one family, there still was this very deep personal attachment or affection between grandchildren and grandfather.
Thank you, sir. And I think we have time for just one last question. May I call upon Nirmala Thakur to ask a question? Ms. Nirmala?
Namaste, sir. I have a question. There was a 6-year-old child who, after seeing all, we had a Gandhian club in our school, and he used to see the pictures and his writings on the walls. And he asked me a question one day that, was Gandhi a good man or a bad man? I replied to him, he was a good man. That's why we have this club and we learn about him. Then he asked me, if he was a good man, then why was he killed? And it really made me think, what should I reply to this 6-year-old boy? And I could not say, I told him, I will reply to you later. He said, so you don't know the answer? I said, yes, I don't know the answer. How should I reply to you? Even today, I cannot reply to such questions. Sir, I would request you, can you suggest me, if a small child like this asks me a question, what should I reply to that child? It makes me very emotional. Yes, sir.
I wish I had a good enough answer to your question. I wouldn't know how to answer a question like that. I think an older person can one day understand that good people also suffer in the world.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for your thoughtful answers to our questions. And they've been quite a range of them across different aspects of your life and Gandhiji's life. I recognize how very real you are in the way you speak of him and when you address us. Thank you for this, because it makes us recognize, first of all, and thank you so much for reminding us of this, that while there are heroes and we do acknowledge them for how much they have done to bring us to where we are, we also need to accept that we need to take up the cudgels and go forward. We need to face challenges and we need to find solutions, and that we cannot keep on looking to others to do this. I think there are many of us here at ETST who are trying to do this very thing, which is to make a difference. And your anecdotes and your stories and your what you have shared with us today has given us further strength to continue to do what we hope to do. While you say that you are not such an authority on schools and education, what you have shared today, your insights and your perspective, definitely gives us more to work with and to take us forward as we face challenges. And I think it is particularly true at this time, not just because of COVID, though COVID-19 is very much a part of what we're going through, but there's a great deal of uncertainty and confusion amongst in the field of education. And when we feel that way, how much more would it affect the young people who are going to be the students and therefore the future of India? So it is up to us to do what we can to make a difference. And what you have shared with us today has helped considerably. Thank you for your answers, and thank you for being so real and so very unassuming in all that you have said and done today. Dilnaz, we're done with the questions, I think. Is that right? Yes? Okay. We come to the last part of today's session. Professor Rajmohan has been very kind to share the link of his blog. He has a blog which is called himmat.net, where he writes about contemporary issues and other aspects related to his own work. So it is very interesting. And for those of you in the audience who would like to continue to read and to get a glimpse of his thoughts and ideas, the link is available. Anjali, would it be possible to share that link with us? Meanwhile, Jyoti, who is on our ETST team, will also share the link for the feedback form, which will be on the chat box. Thank you, Jyoti. Those of you, we request you please to do respond to the feedback, because it always gives us the opportunity to improve what we do. There have been many who have joined us today in this ETST webinar who perhaps have not been to earlier webinar sessions. So we urge you to please look out for further such sessions and series and participate. We're all in this together. We're learning as we're doing, but we are very clear that we want to improve what is happening in the field of education in India. Here's the blog link. So please make a note of it so that you can continue to read what Professor Rajmohan writes about and shares. We come to the end of today's session. Once more, thank you very much, Professor Rajmohan, for being so very open and clear in your words to us. Excuse me. We wish you all the best in your research, and we look forward to another session perhaps in the future, when another 90-minute session when we could talk about more related to not just to education, but to the condition of India today and what we could do to make things better. So thank you once more.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you and best wishes to everyone.
Thank you. The last was a poster, I think, for the final session, which is for the next session, which is on 16th October. Nitesh, can you share that poster so everybody gets a chance to see it? Thank you. This one is also on compassionate leadership. It's called Leading with Compassion. And we will be sharing this on the WhatsApp group. And so please do make a note of it and find the time to participate. The more we participate and share, the more we learn from each other and the more we can do. With that, best wishes to all, and we take leave.